Hello, everybody. It's Raina from Garden District Bookshop, and welcome to Virtual Happy Hour. Tonight, I'm really excited to welcome Julia Cooke to Virtual Happy Hour. Her book, Come Fly the World, could not have come out at a better time. It will help all of us that are wishing we could travel and get out into the world, but are still stuck at home right now. It fills that void perfectly. Julia is, her work has been published in so many publications. The New York Times, Smithsonian Magazine, The Village Voice, the list goes on. And this is her second book. And I'm going to click the button and invite her onto the screen with me. Hi, Julia.
Hi, Raina.
How are you this evening?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing pretty good. I like there's light outside my window now.
It's amazing, isn't it?
No. When the last couple of months when it first started getting dark and it was just so dark and I was like, oh, it's
the worst.
But it's beautiful now outside. So where are you in the world, actually?
I'm in Vermont. I live in a small town in Vermont.
Oh, so how cold is it up there?
I'm looking out my window at snow.
Oh, well, I'm sure it's very pretty outside the window. I will stay in the South. I feel like New Orleans is as far north as I will ever live, and that is okay. I'm okay with it. So everyone who's watching, if you have a question or a comment for Julia or myself, type it into the comments and we can see those and we will answer you, or just say hi and tell us where you're watching from.
And I would love to, as you know, on that note, ask if there are any, if there's any flight crew in the audience to please raise your hand, say where you're from, what years you worked, what airline. It's been really fun at different events to call out the flight crew. That's
so fascinating to me. This is the first book. Yours is the first book I've ever read really about the people of aviation. And learning that there's such a tight-knit community. Of course, it makes sense, but it's one of those things you never think of until you start reading something like this. Did you really know about that before you got started writing this or researching it?
I didn't. I hadn't thought about it either. There are so many aspects of this book that are so intuitive and yet totally surprising too.
What was maybe one of the most surprising things?
I mean, the most surprising thing was definitely, a huge thread, a chunk of the book is about these Vietnam War flights. And I had never, it makes so much sense. Of course, as troops are being built up in Vietnam, there's the Pacific Ocean to cross. And the US government doesn't really have tons and tons of airplanes to ship its soldiers out on. So of course they were going to contract with civilian airlines. And of course then the flight crew, who were all women, were going to be the people who were going to staff those flights. But then, the A to B to C makes sense, but the A to C is kind of shocking that, the flight crew, that these glamorous women were flying these soldiers into active war zones.
Yes.
Not to get totally serious right off the bat.
No, but it is fascinating. You're right, because that whole part, I had no idea. I mean, you just assume that if you're military is moving in military planes and military trucks and, it's all military. But the easiest way to move people is in a plane built to move people.
Completely.
And yeah, that makes perfect sense to me. Okay, so I have a follow-up question, I guess you may or may not know. Do we still use commercial flights to move troops?
Yeah, so Tori, one of the women in the book, flew soldiers out to Operation Desert Storm. So she flew the troops out in Vietnam, and she flew them out to Operation Desert Storm also. And she took great pride in that. Not everyone that I interviewed felt the same way about participating in the war effort, but Tori was very proud of that.
Well, and that's fascinating too, because you talk about, in the beginning of the book, most of the way through the book, all these rules and regulations that were put in place for stewardesses, not just to get the position, but then to keep it. And when you reach certain age or certain marital status or whatever, you were expected to just resign.
Quit.
Yeah.
Quit or risk getting fired. At some point. So the rules were that you had to quit at age 32 or 35 on some airlines, or when you got married. And so a lot of women at some point, the estimate was that 30 to 40% of the women had secret marriages. They would just take off their wedding bands and keep flying because, why offer up the information?
Right. You just can't invite anyone you know from work.
Exactly.
You're good. And nowadays, of course, that just seems crazy pants. Like, why would I? It makes no difference. One day, I'm not married, and the next day I am married. I can clearly do the job the exact same way. But you write in the book where they were worried that the husband would call and wonder where his wife is.
Yes.
Or something. Like,
reading.
okay.
So those the lawsuits. So the book talks about how, for those of you in the audience who haven't read the book, the book traces out how the stewardesses, the lawsuits that they pushed against the airlines to keep to dismantle that kind of those sexist rules and regulations. To read the transcripts of them today is hilarious. It's depressing and very funny to read the ways that the airlines would say, yes, but the husbands call and they complain because the wives aren't home. And so can you imagine a husband calling the wife's employer to complain that the wife is not coming home? It's the fact that it's kind of unimaginable today is a good thing.
Well, the other interesting thing I thought about that too is like the husband or the fiance before they got married would know she was a stewardess, right? So then they get married and, 2 months later, he's like, where's my wife? She's on a flight to Mexico.
Yeah.
She told you when she left, home yesterday or something like that. Like that just seems sort of weird because those people would know what their spouses are doing, like what their job was. Just because the airline didn't know doesn't mean the husband doesn't know where his wife disappears to for days at a time.
One would hope he would know.
Yes. I mean, we're making assumptions here. But if not, then that's not really the problem. The getting married wasn't the issue.
Exactly.
It does also make me wonder about like pilots and stuff.
Yeah.
Did they were allowed, they didn't have any sort of issues.
No,
these
rules were just blatant sexism. They were intended to keep women young. They were intended to, and having young women served various purposes. It meant that health insurance costs would stay lower, probably. It meant that, that they wouldn't have to pay pensions as much. It was a financial thing, but it was also a sexist thing. They wanted young, beautiful women. They didn't want them to age. And the women had other ideas. They said, pardon?
Oh, it sounds great, I guess.
I mean, yeah.
In like this weird, perfect world, but more like, I just wish I wasn't aging so much. Not like, please replace me now.
That was one of the nicest things about spending so much time with these women. It's a psychological side benefit that I'm not as afraid of aging as I once was, because these women were, for the most part, just so remarkable. They aged so well. And I don't mean physically. I mean, although they did also age beautifully physically. They were just, they lived great lives. They were happy with their lives. They still traveled together in their 70s with their girlfriends. So that was really remarkable and wonderful to see.
It's inspiring, to see people who have gracefully moved into this new part of their lives. And then just all of these women, at least the way you write them, they own who they are. And I feel like you kind of have to in order to break away from what was expected of you. And
that's
all
such
of these
a
women
good way to put it. That's such a good way to put it. And that's what they're like in real life. It was one of the things I first respected and enjoyed about them. Did
you talk to any current stewardesses? I know not with Pan Am, but maybe to get to see what it's like today.
That's
and what
a really good idea, and I totally didn't do it. 100% not. No, but I do have a very good friend. So in my first book, this is totally crazy. My first book, I was about youth culture in Havana, Cuba, and I lived with a Cuban family in Havana, and the son of that Cuban family, who I became very, very close friends with, he's a man named Carlos. He and his family have immigrated to the U.S. They came here. They've been in Miami he is actually a flight attendant on United now. And so he and I would talk about this all the time. So I didn't interview anyone formally, but I did have some insight into the current job.
Oh, so Linda's my mother. And she's awesome, and she watches, and Hope watches every week as well. But I did not know this. So I've just learned something about my mom. She was hired by Easton, but failed her exam because she has false teeth. I did not know that.
That's amazing. And yes, if there are any, I'll repeat what I said at the beginning. If there's any flight crew in the watching, in the virtual audience, please tell us who you are, where you're from, what years you worked, and what airline.
Well, that brings up an interesting point too. So there's the things that you mentioned in the book specifically, which are like the aging, and there's weight restrictions, height restrictions, and whether your marital status or whether you have a baby. But there's other things too. So like she had false teeth. So, she was too short, but so she was out anyway. But like there were other things that would preclude you from being a stewardess too.
Yeah, I mean, that was another really interesting aspect of my research. That I read a bunch of the notes from hiring sessions, and to read the ways that these hiring people, the interviewers, were assessing the physical appearances of these young women. It was excruciating. It gave me, the icky kind of chills. They were really pretty granular in how they were assessing what women looked like.
Well, the idea too that we think, people will say a lot, like kind of flippantly, oh, we never even gave it a second thought back then. But your book clearly shows us that plenty of people were giving it a second thought. They just didn't have the power yet to do anything about it.
And what I find so interesting is that, this really shifted the way I thought about the feminist movement, because it really, these women were not credited with doing what they did, which was move the needle quite a bit. In part because their objection wasn't necessarily, they didn't bring these lawsuits against the airlines because they felt objectified, even if they may have felt objectified. That was not the reason why most of the women brought the lawsuits against the airlines. They brought the lawsuits against the airlines because they wanted to keep working, because they liked flying so much. They wanted to keep traveling. And they didn't want to have to quit when they were getting married or aging out of the job.
When there's so few jobs that can give you this sense of freedom, while also it's a hard job. It's a tough job. It's long hours. It's not as easy to do, but it's worth it because you do get this freedom to travel and to just be independent.
Totally. And back then that was it was unprecedented for women. Keep in mind that when the first stewardesses were beginning to fly, which was in the 1920s, it was a slow start for women. The short version of the history is that in the 1920s, it was mostly men who were stewards on planes, and then it shifted to women after a really intrepid pilot named Ellen Church went up to a United Airlines. She was a pilot and a nurse. And she approached a United Airlines executive at the airport in San Francisco and said, I've got an idea for you. You should hire nurses because these planes are not pressurized. People get airsick. They're afraid of flying. It's a new technology. We know how to handle this. And he turned around and made the pitch to the airline that, basically the quote is, if a mere girl isn't worried, why should anyone else be? And also, side benefit, women are pretty. So it very quickly, it was not exactly what the pitch that she was making, but it worked, I guess. And the men and women both were being hired at that point. And then World War II happened, and it all shifted to women. And so from then on out, it was a job exclusively for women. So, think about the 1940s, 1950s. Right. It wasn't really socially acceptable for women to be traveling alone around the world. And unless you were a stewardess. So,
yeah. Well, that's really interesting. Like, I had no idea. There's so much history that is either in your book or that your book brings up, just like what you know, the story you just told, that I had no idea. And of course we think of now, I mean, I thought having men stewards was a newer thing. Like that was a step forward for men coming into that.
Well, and you're not wrong, because it was not a male job from the 50s to 1972, when a man brought a lawsuit against an airline and said, I want to fly too.
I mean, that's fascinating. I mean, the whole thing is fascinating to me. Like that was, yeah. Your book does an amazing job of of touching on that wanderlust that people who love to travel have. But it's a great book for people who love aviation, for war buffs. Like the whole Vietnam War thing, I actually did. I sold your book recently. Like I had a gentleman pre-order it, and I was like, you love, you know, military history. I promise you, I know what the cover looks like. I know you're looking at me going, no. I was like, I promise you there's going to be stuff in this book you don't know about, and it's military history, and it's so true.
That's so fun to hear. I love that so much.
So I read that you were the daughter of a former Pan Am exec. Is that what gave you the idea for this book, or what gave you kind of the push for this theme, for this book?
Yeah, it's actually, in some way it is, in that it was via him that I knew about the Pan Am Historical Foundation, which hosts, it's an organization. I mean, it's exactly what it says it is, the Pan Am Historical Foundation, but it hosts a lot of events in and around New York, especially, which is where I was living at the time. So they hosted an event. It was a commemoration of the 50th anniversary of the flight that brought the Beatles to the US, which was a Pan Am flight. And they held this event at the TWA terminal at JFK in New York. So I went to this event, and there was a Beatles cover band, and there were screaming fans with signs about how much they loved the Beatles. It was a fun retro event. And I met two former stewardesses and just spent the whole time talking with them. And I found them fascinating. They were so smart and really interesting and sophisticated and funny. One of them was at age 75. She said she never bought a return ticket from anywhere because you never know.
Wow.
I just loved her spontaneity, and she was awesome. And I wanted to know everything about them. I really wanted to know how they had acquired those attitudes and the knowledge. They talked about history with this deep, deep knowledge, and I loved it.
When it turns out, in so many ways, they're a part of it.
Completely, yeah. I mean, there was a reason why they spoke about it with such intimacy and authority, because they had participated in it.
So my mom, I'm going to put this into context. I think it was Continental that took us to Vietnam. So my dad was a soldier in Vietnam, and my mom was in the USO. So
wow,
they, I guess, flew on Continental.
Yeah.
So much.
it's true that so the government didn't only contract with Pan Am, but because Pan Am had been involved in a lot of different in the Korean War, airlift of refugees, it had been involved in World War II as well. And so Pan Am really had the biggest chunk of the contracts, but all sorts of different airlines flew, Flying Tigers, United, Continental, Braniff, Eastern. They all had military contracts and took some flights out to Vietnam.
Wow. Just wow. That's all. So I'm going to repeat here for everybody who's new watching with us. If you have any questions or comments or anything, put them in the comments. We can see those and we will answer them. And if you are a former,
let's say flight crew.
Flight crew, flight crew. Please, definitely put that in the comments. Tell us a story. Tell us where you flew. Tell us where you're watching from. Tell us who you flew with. Let us know.
And I see someone saying, weren't the original Pan Am headquarters in Key West? Yes. I can't, Key West or Miami. I'm not 100% sure. But the first flights were out of Southern Florida. Yeah.
Wow.
They were mail flights to Cuba.
So it's hard to imagine a major airline having a headquarters on Key West. You can walk from one end to the other of that island. It's a long walk.
Yeah, but the planes were small back then. Remember, these were not jet planes, so they were tiny little things.
That's true. And if you were taking mail to Cuba, that would be where you want to take off from.
Exactly.
I'm originally from Florida. So been to Key West. Miami's just no, it's too big. Don't never end up actually going over there unless you're going specifically for an event, and then you just leave again.
Well, the training school was in Miami. Oh, that's so cool.
Oh, that's cool. See, now we have a restaurant recommendation.
Yeah.
Next time we're in Key West. You never know. I have no idea when that's going to be, but I'm always looking.
Someday.
That's right.
Someday.
So I have a question for you. We were talking briefly just before this about travel and having to cancel travel because of COVID. What's a trip you had to cancel?
So my secret, which is not a secret, is that I had I didn't have to cancel anything formally because of COVID because I had just had a baby. So I was not doing a whole ton of travel. I had to cancel a lot of thoughts. You know, we were planning to go to Portugal, but we had not purchased tickets. So,
right. You were like, oh, I'm going to pick a date. Nope, not going to.
It was infuriating. I was just starting last March. I was just starting to come out of, he was like 8 or 9 months old. And I was, you know, I'd done a bunch of driving trips with him. We'd gone to visit friends in New York and family, and we'd gone to Boston and Maine and done a lot of driving around New England. But I was just starting to plan. I was finishing this book where I couldn't travel with an infant.
An infant and a baby book and a baby
exactly.
person?
No, it was too much. I needed the childcare to get out of the house to get the work done. Understood. So I was just starting to really put it all together and think about trips, and then no more.
Yeah. I was going to take my son to Universal Studios, which is not that big, but we were also going to go to Hawaii later. I don't know. I guess it was September now in the past, and all that. Just nope. Those aren't things. But soon, I can feel it.
Yeah, I know. Everyone, the pent up energy is starting to. It's everyone's getting very excited.
Like any day now, I'm gonna start being able to pick those dates. Like start penciling them in.
Yeah.
That's gonna be good. It's gonna be good. Okay, let's see. Carl has a question. How did you collect the artifacts like the photos and route maps that are in the book?
It's a great question, and that's from my college roommate Carrie.
Carrie,
I see two of my college roommates. One of the women. I lived with 7 women in college, and 6 of us, and one of them is from New Orleans. So this kind of. So I hope.
Oh, I probably talked to her on the phone the other day.
Probably.
She called and said, that you were friends, and asked tons and tons of questions about the event and how you attended, all of these things, and I'm like, it's me. I'll be there. So,
yeah.
Hi, Carrie.
Well, hi, and I love you all. So that's a great question. Some of them I collected from. Some of them are just like family photos. They're the women's own photos. I can actually, if you give me 1 second.
Yeah, do it. What's on the floor? I don't know which.
I have. So these are Karen's. This is Karen's scrapbook. If you read the book, you'll see. And this is her at the Army Service Club. So she began her career at a service club in Ulm, Germany, where she ran. So that's Karen. Sweet blonde. So they were incredibly generous with their. Here she is.
That's so awesome.
With their photos and their letters also. They gave me all of their letters from the 60s and 70s, so I saw what they were writing back to their parents at home. And then a bunch of the photos are also from the archives. The Pan Am archives are in Miami at the University of Miami, the Kislak Center, which is an incredible trove. You can paw through. I mean, I can paw through the press releases and the photos from fashion shows that Pan Am ran in the 60s, and like amazing stuff.
Were they fashion shows for their own like uniforms and stuff, or were they?
No, they were fashion. They like hosted these incredible fashion shows with 1960s clothing. That's amazing. I would wear half of it today, but it's really fun.
I've seen some of those pictures you've been posting on your Instagram, those outfits. Like, what is it about that 1960s women's like attire that just looks glamorous no matter who's in it.
It really does. I don't know.
If we knew, we could somehow bottle that and figure out how to make this.
Exactly. Yep.
But yeah, I'm gonna post actually a link to your Instagram, because everyone should, after the event, go and check out all the things that she's been posting about stewardesses and Pan Am and all of that. It's really interesting. I will do that here in just a moment. Let's see.
I see a question from Lavinia. Hi, Lavinia. Who's an amazing travel writer. The book came out of an article. Okay, yes. So the book, the article actually came out of the book. My instinct was that this was a book from the beginning. I thought it was going to be a different kind of book. At first, my secret hope was to find a stewardess who had been collaborating with the CIA, because there are tons of rumors. The more I met, so I met these two women at the event, and I started going to more events, and I started meeting more of them, and I knew I wanted to write a book about them. I didn't know what kind of book it was going to be yet. So and the more I talked to them, I knew I wanted it to be something to do with diplomacy on some level, because one of the things that had so impressed me about these women was the way that they had basically done soft diplomacy, like soft power. They'd enacted soft power on a global stage long, 30 years before that was even a term that diplomats were using.
Okay,
so
explain that. What is
soft power and soft diplomacy? It's what we would call like cultural diplomacy. So, the Peace Corps, which began in the 1960s, is an aspect of, a branch of that. Sending musicians to Europe, how the U.S. used to send musicians to Europe in the middle of the Cold War to kind of play jazz, and that. Yeah, there's an amazing book called The Cultural Cold War by Frances Stoner Saunders, which goes really, really into depth about all of this. But today, that would be called soft diplomacy. And to me, these stewardesses were doing that. Just on an informal level. So I wasn't sure what angle I was going to be able to find that would be able to sustain a full book. And I wanted to find someone who was working with the CIA, which is a persistent rumor. And I heard tons about it. And I found different kind of declassified documents that pointed that way, but I was never able to get anything declassified or on the record or anything like that. So,
okay. So do you think that was happening now that you have talked to people and you have done this research?
100%.
From rumor, you just don't have anything official.
Totally. I'm holding out hope that someday I will be able to write an amazing long form piece about someone. One
of these women is going to call you up.
I hope so. Point. Please, if you're out there and watching, call me.
Yes, that would be such a fascinating phone call. You're just.
Oh my God.
I'm sorry. What?
I live and wait for that.
Yes, please. You just drop your purse. You just drop whatever you're doing. You're like,
walk away.
I have a pin. What do we do? Okay, I'm here. I'll meet you.
Where are you? I'm going to the airport right now.
You're just like, I'm sorry, honey. I've got to go. Yeah. I'll text you from the taxi.
Exactly.
But your life, just from reading your bio, has kind of taken you all over the place too.
It has. It's been really. I've been really lucky. So I lived in Mexico City and in Cuba for 5 years, and I loved it. And I moved back to New York to get my graduate degree, because I realized that I'm no good at writing about things that don't really interest me. In the life of a full-time freelance writer, you have to write about a bunch of things that don't interest you for the money. Right. So I was not going to be any good at that. So I thought I wanted to teach instead of, there are two kind of paths for financial, sustaining a creative writing career, I think. Yeah. And one of them is freelance writing, and the other is teaching as well as writing. So I wanted to teach. And so I went and got my graduate degree and I started teaching. And the great benefit of that is that I didn't have to write about anything that I didn't find really interesting. So that's been really awesome.
Yeah, that's definitely a silver lining. I am the same way. I need to, like, I can write or talk or whatever all day long about something I want to talk and write about. But if you're like, here's a subject, go, I'm like, cool, it's a cup.
Yeah,
It's clear.
exactly. You're like, I can
Wait,
drink
I
things
have
out
like
of it.
5,000 more words. Oh my gosh.
No.
I'm out.
Terrible.
So you were, you were able to do that and then turn it into 2 books. You've had 2 books.
Yeah. So the first book, it's interesting. My first book was about youth culture in Cuba, and that book. It felt almost like an exorcism. Like it had to be my first book because it was the thing that made me want to be a writer, and a journalist. It's the thing that made me want to get out into the world and comment on it. Because I had studied abroad in Cuba when I was 20, and I lived there, and then I was loved the place, found it incredibly interesting, so full of contradictions, so difficult to live in, but also incredible. So I came back and started reading about it, and I took a couple of college courses about it, and nothing that I found, it just didn't chime with my personal experiences, which it was the first time that I felt like I could add to the conversation in an important way. So I had to write that book.
Well, I find that so about places, especially that we have been cut off from for reasons.
Completely.
Where everything we get is filtered through the lens of whoever's feeding it to us. And that's generally true about anything, but most subjects you can go, okay, well, that sounds a little off. Let me go find something else. And you find like 10 different sources and you put them together. Okay, well, this makes sense. I know I've taken pieces from each of those, but like Cuba is somewhere that isn't like that. And we're just sort of starting to get those more stories as well when it was more open and easy to go, and hopefully it will be again soon.
Yeah. I think so. I mean, it just doesn't make sense to pursue the same policy if it hasn't worked. So, clearly cutting it off. And my Cuban friends, and I call them my Cuban family, the family that I lived with that I'm still in very good touch with, and I still visit them in Miami. They've started to argue with me. They don't like the idea of having things be open with Cuba because the older generation, right. The younger generation doesn't necessarily agree, but
well, that's similar to here, I guess,
a little bit
too, because and if you spent the more time you've spent with those policies, and especially being alive and actively involved in the world when those policies were enacted, you clearly would have a different feeling.
Yeah,
and that's understandable.
Yeah, exactly. To me, I just look at it and see a failed policy.
Right, exactly. To me, I'm just like, I can't go to Cuba. Why?
It just doesn't make any sense. If it hasn't worked in 50 years, it's probably not going to work next year.
I just change it up. Just change it up. See what happens. I don't know. I just having a conversation this evening over our current dinner policy with my son. And I was like, you know what? Let's just try this other thing for a few days. See what happens. Worst case scenario, it sucks. None of us like it. We just go back to this, which I believe is a failed policy, but cool. Let's just not argue about it and go from there. Yeah. My son is 14. So, and you have a baby, a year-old or something, so, right?
I have 3 babies right now.
Oh my God. I'm just going with the one I know.
I have a baby who's 20 months old, who is the baby that kept me from traveling last year. And now I have babies that are keeping me from traveling right now. I mean, even though the virus also is contributing to that, but I have twin newborns.
Oh, this is making more sense to me. Because when we went to schedule this, I was told, maternity leave. And then in the conversation before we went live, you were like, oh, last year he was like 5 to 9 months old. I'm like, that's a long maternity leave. Can I ask? I'm cool.
Nope. I have 7-month-old twins. The surprise of my life.
Yes. So your dinner time policies have not become an issue quite yet. When they do,
which they will.
They will. They will. And all of those things, this is what happens. All of the things you thought you knew. Then my son turned like 13 and all of that was gone. Everything I thought I knew. Yeah. One day he likes enchiladas, the next day he hates enchiladas.
It's going to be really interesting to have 3 teenagers at the same time.
I feel for you now.
Yeah.
And I'm not through it, so I have 0 advice. One day, like right now, I'm just in the complete chaos of it. I'm just like, I don't even know. Do we just never ever have enchiladas again? I don't know what to do. So, but by the time you get here, I'll be like, look, honey.
Here's the deal.
Here's what. Just eat as many enchiladas you want and forget about it. Yeah. They'll make Pop-Tarts and they'll live. I think that's where
they're not going to starve.
I really feel like that's where this is going. Is just he can live off of Eggo waffles, and I'm just going to need to deal with that.
No harm. Just try it.
Yeah, it's fine.
But the 13.
Oh, you will use all the skills you're learning now. You will use those later.
Yep.
Just not in the way you're going to.
I've gotten a lot more patient. I'm terribly impatient as a personality trait. Not my best, but having kids is helpful. It helps develop it.
Absolutely. I was much, much more spontaneous. And then all of a sudden, like, he's going to want to know what we're doing. Like, building a routine is important.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So so this brings me back to, one of the things that I really admired about the stewardesses that I kept meeting, as you become a mother in contemporary society, I think my experience is very similar to many people. I wind up talking more to my friends who have kids, in part because I need their help. Like the 2 women who are on this chat have helped me immensely to figure out how to be a mom and what to do. And, when I text them at 2:00 in the morning, they'll answer at 6 and it's great. I'll figure it out. So, but the one of the most remarkable things about these women is that they're so diverse. Their experiences and who they became and what they did the range is so broad. Like the women who are in the book, one of them was a flight attendant for 50 years, kept flying, never had kids, never got married. She was engaged twice, but it never really worked out. And then one of them got married and had 2 kids. Another one got married to a not very nice person. A very nice person. He's a nice person. He wasn't great for her. They split up. She got married again, had 1 baby. One of the women got married, has stepkids. And another one was also single for her whole life. So you've got these women whose experiences are just so broad, and they all, and for the most part, they're friends, which I loved seeing.
It goes back to that just community of people who have these shared experiences, even though they came from totally different places.
Totally.
Too. Like when you write about them, you do this amazing job of building each individual storyline, and then as they come together, in this same job.
Yeah.
Sometimes together on the same flight crews and stuff. Not always, but sometimes they do. And then, they have their own lives. But they come from totally different places. They go to totally different places. And what they have in common is this, like, feeling, this personality for adventure and
totally
independence.
And this desire to be in the world. Their commitment to this global lifestyle and their openness to difference, cultural difference, that none of them are daunted by it. They're all just totally interested in it. They would say that they're the people who say yes and. They're not the no buts.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And as you're writing about each of them, in my mind, I'm like, oh, I want to be friends with them. Like, I want to be friends with them. I don't even know if I can keep up with them. Like, some of them are just going at a pace. Like,
I'm telling you, at some of these conferences, I have gone to bed before them.
And they're
Not
coming
kidding.
to these conferences as older women coming back to do these reunions, and you're like, I'm sorry, I gotta go.
No, I'm like, I can't keep up. I gotta go to bed.
See, that's what I want. That's goals. Hashtag goals.
It's totally true.
Absolutely. So I think we had a question about the book cover, which I absolutely love, by the way. Did you have a hand in like designing this, or did they come up with this? Is it based on some photo, or?
So they designed it. And the tricky part, the thing that I had say in was we were trying to figure out what we wanted the sunglasses to show. What would be a representative? What was the best image to
so you guys can see.
Yeah, to show, to demonstrate this sense of freedom and excitement, and also serious, that the job was serious. It wasn't just, nightclubs and beaches. It was cities, and it was war zones, and it was it was much more serious stuff. So we found that was what we settled on.
Is it Miami?
I think so. It looks like it.
It looks like Miami to me too.
Yeah.
Sure. And what about, okay, so this looks like an actual photo.
It is an actual photo. So that's an actual photo. The woman waving is a late 1950s ad. The image on the back, there's an image of the Pan Am Worldport.
Mine doesn't have that because it's
I can show you. Hang on. Let me grab it.
Mine is the advanced reader's copy. Yeah, and so you guys were talking about pictures and route maps. I don't have those either in my version. Like, I've seen them. I flipped through the finished copy at the store, but the one that is my copy, and I had to keep, like, usually if I read the advanced reader's copy, that is the one that I keep on my shelf. It gets. I have a theory with books that I don't dog ear my pages, but if it gets a little wear and tear while I'm enjoying it and I'm reading it, I don't want to repeat.
All the better. Yeah.
Like my cat chewed on the top right here. Don't know why he did that, but he did, and that makes me love it even more. Like it's got a little thing, but it shows that it's loved. So I loved it.
I'm an underliner. So, which my husband finds appalling. He thinks books are meant to be what they are. And the only argument I've ever heard that actually I find compelling against underlining is that an art critic I know said that he didn't want his former self. So I find it really, really reassuring to read things and see what my former self found interesting in a certain book. Like in books that I really love, I feel like it's really lovely to come back to who I was and to remember to think about how changed I am. There's this one book that I love reading called Things I Don't Want to Know by British author Deborah Levy, or Levy. And she's amazing. The book's amazing. And I've read it 3 times, and each time I find different things really, fascinating, and I identify with different aspects. And I like seeing the things that I had identified with before. But he said he doesn't want his former self to interrupt the thinking of his present self, which I think is interesting. Still doesn't convince me.
Right. I see that.
It's the only argument I've ever heard that I find good.
My husband and I were reading the same book recently, and I had gotten a used copy for the second copy, and I had given it to him, and it had all these underlinings in it. And he's like, "Oh, well, this is the part I'm supposed to care about." Like, I know they've already done the work for me because I guess this is important and this is important. I was like, I don't know if that's the way that works.
Yeah.
So that's my only thought about underlining. But now I found that people who had teachers that they really liked that made them highlight or underline things in books, they are more likely to highlight and underline things in the books they have.
Yeah.
See, the only teacher that forced me to like actually write in a book, I did not really love them so much. And I feel like it's just also like, I was like, well, I'm getting nothing from this. I don't like this. I'm not enjoying this class, blah, blah, blah. And now I'm like, kind of, nope, I'm not going to write my books. And I am sure just in anecdotal talking to people, this is what I've decided in my personal research. I believe that has something to do with it.
That makes sense.
So I know this book just came out. But what are you working on?
It's another book that has to do with women and travel in a way, but I don't want to talk too much about it because I'm too superstitious. I haven't been able to do. It has to do. I have a lot of research that I have to do in archives, and since the archives have all been closed because of COVID, I haven't been able to get as far in the work on it as I would like to. But rest assured, it will take me to a lot of different places, and I will get to go to Berlin and Hong Kong and England.
All right.
For it.
I mean, so. I'm in. This is travel, women, got to do research.
And in history. So, you know.
Yeah. I don't even know much more. And what I've learned about this book is that no matter what the subject is, I'm going to learn something. It's going to be interesting. So, I'm in.
Awesome. Thank you.
Tell me when I'm there. I hadn't really thought about the archives being closed so much. Do they not even let you make appointments, or it just depends on where you need to be?
Yeah, exactly. It depends on. Some of them have started to reopen to very select. You
totally should.
I would love to. It's my favorite city. My husband and I were just talking about it, about how, in a different life, we would absolutely live there 100%. I didn't know Lavinia was there, but you guys are lucky to have her.
Yeah, so New Orleans is great. You can come do some research here.
I know.
I know people.
Yeah.
Now you know more people.
Exactly. No, it's such an amazing city.
You can have an in-person signing, so I'll give you a reason
to travel.
See, you need a reason to travel. I will hook you up. You just
awesome. I will take you up on it. I'm there.
Okay, no, I know the book came out 6 months ago, but seriously,
they need my signatures urgently.
Right? Exactly. Make this happen. When she just published that article, we'll print it out. I don't know. I'm working on the angles. We're gonna figure it out. Lavinia has a guest room.
I'm there. Done.
You don't have to bring everybody. You can make it a girls' weekend.
Oh God, yeah. The idea, I have to say, the first thing that I found really daunting. I mean, having twins is a daunting, thing. And I'm very luckily, I'm happy to report that mine are very good babies, and we're incredibly lucky. They're not nightmare babies, but the most daunting, the first thing I thought was, how in God's name am I going to fly with 3 children? It was the absolute first thing I thought. So judge me.
Twins. Oh, how am I going to?
Literally, I was like, what does this mean for getting through an airport?
Oh my gosh. And all of things are so inconsistent with the different airports, even though they're technically supposed to all be following the same rules. I know when I was flying with my son when he was a baby, like sometimes I'm pushing the stroller and I'm trying to fold it all up, and do all the things. And I flew a lot by myself, just me and him, when he like under 2, getting in that free seat. And sometimes they would come out from behind and help me fold things up and set it up on the conveyor belt, and it was great. And the next leg of the trip, they'd be like, I can't touch it. I'm not allowed to touch it. I'm sorry. I'm like, but
you're definitely or maybe that, I mean,
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, it was years ago, so I don't even know. But it would be like almost in the same trip, or like on the way there and then on the way back. And they'd be like, I'm not allowed to touch it. Like apologizing, not being mean, but they're like, I'm sorry, I would like to help you, but I can't. And I'm like, okay, but that person totally just touched all my stuff, so they didn't find anything. I don't know. Let's help with that. They probably are going to be amazing travelers.
Thank you, Lavinia. I need to hear this.
Growing up in a household that embraces travel and new experiences, and that sense of adventure, I think that rubs off, even if you don't get to take as many trips with them as you might want to, because it's a little more difficult.
Yeah.
They're going to get that feeling.
Yeah, I think so, and I hope so. It's the kind of mom I want to be.
Absolutely. I see that about you. So I also have to say, I kind of love your shirt.
Oh, thank you.
It's like that. Hearts and
Thanks.
clubs and spaces.
You don't have to wear many accessories with something like this.
Yeah. It was really good too, because it's now that you see it, but in the beginning it was actually kind of subtle, because I was, oh, it's decorative, that's great. Just move on about a conversation. And I'm like, wait a minute. At some point, like 20 minutes ago, I'm like, oh my gosh.
Well, thank you. It's only the second time I've worn it, so I'm really glad to hear that.
Well, I will impart a secret to I've been doing virtual happy hour now for almost a year. And I recently joined one of those like subscription box things where they send you pieces of clothing, and then you get to like try them on, and then you keep what you like and you don't what you don't like. Because I don't have 52 different tops, one for every week.
No, I don't think I do either.
You don't really realize it. Like, I don't have that office job where you're going in 9 to 5 for 5 days a week. So you do kind of have an idea of like all the pieces, and you don't want to wear the same thing from yesterday. So like, I didn't really have that idea. And then I started watching the video clips from all the virtual happy hours, and they're side by side all of a sudden. Like, if you go to our YouTube right now and you want to watch almost all of them are up there. And so you start looking at them side by side and like, oh my gosh, now they're just like 3 little squares away as the same shirt. Yeah. Even though in reality it was like a month apart. I'm like, but that looks like I only own 4 shirts. What's happening here? And then I'm like, I need to figure something out. So there you go. Some behind the scenes for anyone who's doing
well done.
Things I've learned over the course of virtual happy hour. Do you want to talk about Share Your Story, this new page you put on your website?
Yes. So at our launch event, we had 15 former stewardesses in virtual attendance. So I've started a sub-site on my Come Fly the World website, which is Share Your Story. So if anyone, I would love it if you're a former flight crew, or if you know if you have an amazing story. So this all comes from the fact that when I began writing this book, pretty much everyone I talked to about it would say, oh my gosh, I have someone that you have to meet. She's the most interesting woman I've ever met. She's either my aunt, or she's my neighbor, or, she's my friend's mom, or they all had someone. And I found that so compelling. That was one of the reasons that I wanted to write this book, because I was like, everyone thinks about these women. These women kind of haunt everyone's, lived experiences, but no one's ever really pulled it all together in a way that puts them into context in history and explains why they're so remarkable. So I want to collect some of those stories and share them.
What do you plan to do with them, you think?
I think we're going to use them on social media. We'd love to. So
that'll be fun. That's what I told you guys. Follow Julia's Instagram. If you don't, I put the comment there.
Please share your story.
Exactly.
Yes.
That would be so interesting. And you know what else is great about like the flight attendants is not only them and their story and their history, but when you take a flight, just as a passenger, they are the ones that say hello when you first get there. They're the ones. I mean, a stewardess can make or break a flight for you. And they're the ones that they do that little special thing, and the way that they're just their personalities, and they're having a good day, they're having a bad day. You see that. Yeah. And it amazes me too, like 99% of all flight attendants I've ever been on a flight with seem to be having a great day.
Yeah.
Which I'm like, I know this is just like a Tuesday for you.
That's incredible. Yeah.
For me, I've been planning this vacation for a year, but for you, I know this is just like you're trying to go home or something. Yeah. But it always seems like, they're having a great time and they love what they do. That's what it is.
Yeah, because most of them do, I think. So certainly in the past they did.
Oh, and it's a job I imagine you kind of have to, because there's not a lot of reasons to keep doing it if you don't love it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I don't know what stewardesses get paid, but I imagine that at least in the beginning, you got to love what you're doing.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. So what? We're reaching almost 6 o'clock. I don't know. Does anybody have a final question or anything that you would like to say or ask us here as we're wrapping up virtual happy hour?
Other than cheers.
Cheers. What are you drinking, Julia?
I'm drinking a fruit sour.
Ooh, this is tea. A friend of mine gave me some peach whiskey, peach tea whiskey.
Yum.
That's what it is, peach tea whiskey. And she was like, I don't really like this. Do you want it? And I'm like, yes, I do want that. It sounds amazing, first of all. But I just put it in tea and it's just.
Oh, that sounds great.
I don't know why she didn't like it. But well, she's one of my best travel friends. We're always like swapping travel stories, and one of the people that I love getting together with, and you can just dream about the next trip with, and there's no pressure. There's no like, oh, but when are you doing it? Where are you going? And how are you going to do this? No. It's all a dream, and it's totally okay. Totally okay.
You know, psychologists have found that is part of the appeal of travel, is the planning of it and the thinking of it, and that actually like it gives you dopamine hits.
I am so happy that is a fact now.
Yeah, it's totally a fact.
I'm gonna Google that later and read that and keep that in my back pocket for the next time I'm just like watching a YouTube video about like taking a cross-country Amtrak train, which I fell down that rabbit hole like a week ago. And and people are like, what are you doing?
It's self-care.
It really is. It's just like, you watch your Bridgerton, and that's cool, and I will watch
the view out of a random train window.
With some admittedly crappy music in the background, but it's fine. I don't mind. Not everything has the best soundtrack. It's okay. Yeah. And then I get this thing in my head. I'm like, I could do this. I could make YouTube videos.
You should.
And I'm like, oh, I don't know. Like, that's another one of those things. You have to have that commitment. You got to have that level of, it's got to be all in with the YouTube video. But I could not get my son on board with that. He was like, no, Mom. No. Because he's 14, so he's watching YouTube videos of whatever all the time. And he's like, no, Mom, no. That's when he turns into his panic face. The panic face shows up with that fear that I might do it. And then at some point in the future,
cute, though.
I'll show up.
A teenage panic face. I'm looking forward to that.
Oh, yeah. Because he's not sure if you're not going to do it.
Yeah.
And if you do, like, he watches YouTube videos all the time. And of course, his friends watch YouTube videos. And the odds that at one point I'm going to show up in the feed of his or his friend's YouTube video, like YouTube feed, is just that moment when he realizes that could happen, and that sheer, like,
wait, my mom's a person in the world?
Right? Yeah. I don't know. She just disappears, comes back. I don't know what she does. Books, something. She's always trying to get me to read. I don't know. Seriously. It's adorable. Well, Julia, I just want to say thank you so much for joining me for Virtual Happy Hour.
Thank you so much for hosting me. This has been really fun.
It was tons of fun. And thank you to everybody who showed up, commented, watched the video. I appreciate that every single week. And I know Julia appreciates you. We're all here too.
Very much so. Thank you all.
Check out Julia's website. Check out her Instagram. I put the link to her book. We are going to get some signed book plates. Julia's going to send us signed book plates. Yep. So if you'd like a signed copy of the book, you can order it from our website, or you can give us a call or stop in during regular business hours, and we will get that for you. And I think that's it.
Thank you so much. Have a great night, and cheers.
Bye.
Bye.